Welcome to the Whiskey Vault. I'm Daniel Whittington, Chancellor of Wizard Academy, Whiskey Marketing School. Today we're going to talk about mashing. Do the monster mash. Oh, I'm such a dork. Okay, so even if you're not in whiskey production, you have probably heard the term mashing. Ooh, nice one. When used as in the phrase mash bill, or in the term mash bill. And what mash bill is the recipe of different types of grain that go into making your whiskey. So for example, this one's 66% corn, 22% wheat, 12% barley. That's the mash bill, that ratio of grains, right? Now, why is it called mash bill? Because the process in production of taking your grain and that you've malted or just ground up is called grist, and then adding water to convert things into sugars, fermentable sugars, is called mashing, right? This is the phase right before fermentation. So what happens is you take your grain, and if you started with malted barley, that's part of your process. This one's 12% malted barley. If you have corn, you're going to grind up all your different grains to a different level. So corn might be ground up at a certain level, and then wheat might be ground up at a certain level, and barley might be ground up at a certain level, and you take that and you mix them all together, and usually you do it one bag at a time into the mash tun. And you put it in this tank, which is called a mash tun, and you add hot water at specific temperature, and it is the hot water that, as it interacts with the grain, begins to bring on the natural enzymes or amylase that break down the starch in the grain and turn them into fermentable sugars. Without this process, you're not going to get the fermentation that you're looking for. So essentially what happens is the enzymes, as you add hot water and things alter, the enzymes start to break down and convert starch to simple sugars. And simple sugars are the kind of sugars that can be metabolized by yeast, which then creates fermentation. Super nerdy. I hope you're still watching. Once you've got that first run, you'll do a drain off, and then you'll start doing what's called sparges, which means another rush of water to sort of like try to get everything out of that grain that you can. And it will usually happen a couple of times, one at a higher temperature, like say 80 Celsius, and it's gonna dissolve any of the remaining sugars and starches. And then you'll do a final one that's even hotter to dissolve literally anything left in the residue. And very often that last sparge will be taken and added into the next batch of mash tuns. And that's called, anyway, that's a whole other part of the process because it evens out the pH. Anyway, other nerdy things. In a traditional mash tun, you have to mix it, and it's mixed using rakes and paddles on arms. So like sometimes you'll just see paddles, sometimes you'll see rakes, sometimes you'll see both, and it's just these arms. If you open up a mash tun, you'll see this arm, just these spinning around in circles from floor to top, multiple layers, just keeping the grain moving, keeping it from clumping, keeping it fully mixed, and allowing that hot water to interact with every single part of the process. And it breaks up what's called the filler bed, which is the layer of grain that's starting to settle. This is what, in a lauter, is your more typical mash tun style. It allows for a draining process that holds all of that grain but allows the water to come out clean. And that's called distilling or fermenting off grain, right? Some people will take that whole mix and dump it into a fermenter, bits of grain and all. And that's fermenting and distilling on grain when you do that. It gives you more control, basically, the modern lauters. It gives you can move things up and down and disturb every part of the process. So now you've got hot water, you've got the grain mix going in, you've got it mixing up, you've got various temperatures going through, and you've converted all of your starches into simple sugars for fermentation and yeast. And there's just a few more things I wanted to tell you about before we're done with mashing. But right now we're going to talk about Linkumpinch. Linkumpinch. bourbon. This was brought to us, and whoever brought it didn't write their name on it, so I don't remember who it was. So if it's you, put it in the comments, and I'm sorry I didn't give you credit. But this is Dueling Grounds Distillery in Kentucky, and they released this as a part of the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. So that's why it's called the Special Reserve. It was all of these different distilleries released a special edition just for the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. This one is a 5-year-old Char 3 53-gallon barrel. All we know is DGD 155 on the label. Bottle number 174 of only 209 bottles, and we got one. But you know, this, you can try Linkumpinch. They have their typical releases as well. It's just named after the Dueling Grounds, which is a famous location in Kentucky. And remember, 66 corn, 22 wheat, 12 barley, so it's a wheated bourbon. In the nose. Woo! Super dark, baked spice, cinnamon, and oak. There's an almost cola note in there. Toast. It's toast. There's a honey toast. And it's really dry, kind of astringent in the nose. Ooh, man. It's got this slightly green sweetness to the palate and a dense, dark, like molasses tobacco vibe on the palate. Woo, boy, that is heavy-handed, rich. This is 58.75. It's very rich. It's really nice, but you gotta really like a high cask strength, hefty bourbon. I'm gonna see if adding a very real amount of water will sort of like soften out and tie things together. I'm gonna let it sit for just a second. Okay. When you finish the mash process, you have what's called wort, W-O-R-T. And every time I say that, all I can think of is the original Sword in the Stone with cartoon, where he calls him wort the whole movie. You take this liquid that's being drained off the mash tun and it's ready for fermentation, and then you cool it down when it goes into the fermental tanks so that it's the right temperature for yeast to get pitched in and start working. But there's one part of the process that's called sour mash, and this is where this comes in. Notice it's about the mash, sour mash. This does not mean that the mash is sour, or that they put sour things in it. What it means is that some distilleries, for consistency purposes and to control pH values and things like this, they will take the remains and cuts of a distillation process, and instead of dumping it, they'll use some of that water to go back into the mash tun when they add grain and start adding hot water. And it sort of evens out this flavor process breakdown, and that's called sour mash, when you reuse some of the post-distillate stripping run wash back into the mash tun. When you don't do that, when every single time you clean everything, dump it, wash it, and start over, it's not called sweet mash. It's just called mashing. But reusing something back into the process for some sort of pH consistency, that's what sour mash is. And you won't taste it. So there are people who I've heard say, well, I only like sour mash whiskey. It's like, look, you're not gonna taste sour mash. You're gonna taste the production process that they've made across the entire thing. The sour mash process doesn't create a sour whiskey or a specific flavor. It helps aid the production process for them to consistently create the flavor that they were looking for, if that makes sense. Anyway, let's see how this goes. Oh man, it got really oak and wooden. It's dark honey in a cigar box. Interesting. The palate's softened into sweetbread and a little black pepper. I like it with a few dashes of water. I like it better, actually. So, that's Nerd Time with Daniel. Cheers to you. I'm really glad you're here. Hey guys, just a reminder, at the end of this week, it's dry week. That means Friday, May 2nd through Friday, May 9th, noon to noon. There will be a Friday episode this Friday. And then there will be no episodes next week, and we will see you on the other side. Dry week for us is a chance to check in, take a break from consuming alcohol, kind of get a reset, and make sure that we are treating alcohol with the carefulness that it deserves.